Black History Month may have just finished, but the celebration continues. And as part of Claritas' ongoing commitment to providing you with the most comprehensive insights into multicultural audiences, we've invited Albert Thompson, Managing Director of Digital at Walton Isaacson, to join us in a discussion on the Black consumer market. Walton Isaacson is a full-service advertising agency that focuses on marketing sports, lifestyle, entertainment, experiential, and branded content to multicultural consumers. In addition to his role at Walton Isaacson, Albert hosts his own podcast called The Transient Identity, a weekly chronicle for how consumer behavior continuously redefines the rules of engagement for marketers. You may remember Albert from an episode of Claritas' The Marketing Insider podcast back in September on why the success of your company starts and stops with multicultural consumers, but this time you'll get to put a face to the voice. Today, he and I will discuss the unique set of challenges the oversaturation of online identity data brings to marketers trying to specifically reach Black consumers, where proper representation is lacking most, and more. So let's jump into the interview and see what Albert has to say about the Black consumer market. Albert, thanks so much for joining me in a fireside chat to talk about the Black consumer market.
Absolutely, pleasure to be back on the show. So thank you for having me, and hopefully we get into some good discussion. Looking forward to it.
I think we will, and it's good to have you back. And I know this is going to be a good conversation, but just in case someone who's watching us chat for the first time didn't listen to the podcast episode that you were on with me back in September, can you just reintroduce yourself and your role at Walton Isaacson?
Absolutely. So Albert Thompson, Managing Director at Walton Isaacson. Been there with the agency about, I think this is year 13. But a lot of what my background has been in multicultural. So obviously passionate about this particular opportunity.
I wanted to start off mentioning your podcast, The Transient Identity, where you talked about, on a recent episode, you talked about the distributed me and how consumer identities are all over the internet. So
Yes.
We Black consumers, they tend to be very digitally oriented, but does that make it easier for marketers to reach them online, or are there a unique set of challenges presented by that oversaturation of online identity data?
You know, it's interesting. The Black consumer has always been a word of mouth consumer, and this dates back hundreds of years because of the lack of availability in a mainstream voice. It's why Black radio is still so prominent, because that's the voice of the consumer. Black radio is just not about music. It's about talk. It's about gossip. It's about public service announcement. I mean, it is encompassing of everything that embodies what we are about and what we do. So when you start to think about digital, you think about a playground that accelerates that very notion of word of mouth, how information spreads. The reason why platforms like Black Twitter exist in namesake is the ability, unfiltered, at light speed, with very little degrees of separation, to communicate and connect. And that is very indicative to how the segment is behaving. And it's not just state by state, regional. I mean, we are hyper connected in one region to family, friends, trends, movement in other regions. I think that's one of the things that people underscore is we pay attention to what's going on with the Black community in Chicago, in Detroit, in DC, in New York, in Texas, and Oakland, some of those hotbeds. So, when you start thinking about complexity, it's really about intimacy, that the Black consumer uses these platforms differently. And this is one of the conversations we really got into with a lot of our clients. It's great to say you're doing digital audio targeting. It's great to say you're doing connected TV targeting or all things OTT, or you're doing social media. But how are you showing up in social media? And does that align around how we align and use those platforms? Like, we have our own rules of engagements.
Right.
And some of them are rules that we've written for the broader platform at large. So that's really the thing that people need to really delve into, is this notion of consumer intimacy, regardless of the segment, but in particular the Black consumer, because it is how we do these things that makes it differentiating than what you see in general marketing and mainstream. Happy to get into some of those examples.
One thing that I think brands do tend to be guilty of sometimes is using a blanketed marketing approach, which It's probably easier on their budgets, but it's usually not as effective. But what are some of those nuances that brands need to be aware of when they're working on their go-to-market strategy to reach Black consumers in particular, so that they're taking into consideration that we are not all the same? And even though we have some things that connect us as a community, a one-note marketing campaign is basically not going to work on us.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is people need to recognize the Black community is creative. So when you start to look at, let's take, COVID and Instagram. The average user is just using and posting to Instagram. And then DJ Nice, who actually is kind of a friend of the agency, that most of us know, I've had a chance to meet him, obviously 80s rapper, does Club Quarantine. And what we talk to our clients about is that that's how the Black segment does Instagram. We turn it into a party and we invite people in. When you look at that, I said, it's not enough just to run ads around Instagram, Facebook network. You need to look at how we show up. And that's what you find with. So look, you should work with, influencers who are DJs to sponsor parties. Or if you're doing a virtual conference and the waiting room, have a virtual DJ there to play music while people wait. That's the difference in the intimacy. The other thing we've talked about that we just recently did for our client, Lexus in particular, is we really got into this notion of OTT binge watching that we're all doing, and a movie night or movie night out. And look, in the physical world, largely the multicultural consumers are who you see in the theaters, especially the Black consumer when you talk about millennials and Gen Z. But what we said was it's a thing to sponsor virtual movie nights. That movies that are being released, everyone's bringing Black films to the fore across all the platforms because they really buried or didn't even exist. So when you look at that, that's how you show up, because that is the behavior. Look, anyone can run over-the-top targeting, VOD, FEP, connected TV. Not everybody goes and sponsors a movie night. So what we said was, if you're going to show up in OTT, you have to show up with how the segments align with the usage of it. Those are two just great examples, but there's a huge distinction between doing everything OTT programmatically and targeting audience, very much a general market play, to at the level of culture saying, no, you have to find out how you're going to participate in their behavior. And those are worlds apart sometimes when you start to really break it. What I find is that for the Black consumer, you need bottom of funnel intimacy. But a lot of the approaches are top of funnel. And people talk about top of funnel from awareness and bottom of funnel from low conversion, but there is bottom of funnel consumer intimacy. And I think that is what gets missed in multicultural, is that that's what's showing up and being around the behaviors and how they participate. It's very distinctive from just basically existing up here with advertising messaging.
Last summer, we definitely saw a cultural shift with an increase in activism, calls for social justice reform, and brands kind of responded in kind by making public commitments to change. So return on investment, or ROI, it has been and will continue to be key to a brand's bottom line, basically. But is that the main KPI that companies should focus on? And those who have noticed or had it brought to their attention that they weren't adequately marketing to the Black population, is that something that they should be focused on as the key?
Yeah, I mean, look, we have clients that understand Black culture has a greater propensity to move all culture. When the social injustice movement broke out last year, people saw how Black culture could move everybody to the street in every city. That's massive. So you can't deny that. And then it went global. So brands think about it, like, if one segment can pull everyone in united voice, country to country, under a common theme, there's power in that. Kudos to the brands who had already been doing it. We work with clients that have, between the Toyota and Lexus side, they've had a strong commitment to multicultural, particularly the Black segment, going back well over a decade. And it's obviously paid off for them when you look at the results from a sales perspective. But not everybody is at that level. You have brands that have communicated that their growth is going to come through Black and brown audiences. And then you have brands who don't even want to say it, or have been silly enough to say, well, we didn't really make it for you. But there are brands who paid some steep prices in being so emboldened to make statements like that. So I think with them now, people now really understanding how this segment can move culture. The influencer business from a beauty standpoint was very much built by Black female bloggers and YouTubers. Very much like they set the formula, they set the pace, and a lot of it was cracking the code on treatment around hair care because you couldn't get it from the mainstream. And the major purveyors of those brands weren't making stuff for black audiences, Black segments. So it was very real. So one of the things that's come up in a podcast I did was bringing multicultural into product design, because what we're finding out is people are making stuff not necessarily for us. Some are, like I said, emboldened and say, we're not really making it for you. And some of them have figured out we need to be a lot more intentional as to their preferences because they could set the adoption curve.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the next frontier is how multicultural audiences, in particular Black consumer certain categories, are brought into product development, product design. The fact that they can move other segments in terms of adoption. People got to dust off the old corporate social responsibilities umbrella, because it seems like we've only been focused on brand marketing to sell something for the last decade, and start thinking about issues management, crisis management, CSR, public affairs, PR. I mean, they need to expand that range and get a lot more savvy by how their identity looks in the marketplace, starting with the Black consumer, because this now this cancel culture is real and it's here to stay, and people are gonna have to figure it out.
So Albert, it's been a pleasure so far, but I think we're kind of nearing the end of the time we have today. So I want to wrap up with one final question for you. We are recording this at the tail end of February, which is Black History Month, but next month is Women's History Month, and International Women's Day falls on March 8th. So I know you're the father of Black daughters. So where do you see proper representation lacking the most? And what would you personally like to see change for their future?
I think there is a I don't want to say misunderstanding or misconception. I think it's underestimated from a creator standpoint, what the segment of Black women bring to enterprises and the like. And it really doesn't matter with the category, with the industry. And a lot of it has to do with what they have to synthesize and deal with in their upbringing, what they're exposed to, what they have to tolerate. That they are wired with a certain kind of mindset, a certain level of resilience. Look, as parents, you're programming in life lessons, do's and don'ts, tenets, work ethic, all that stuff. So when we look at the world, we look at what we synthesize for them that they will take with them and then use in whatever their profession is. And it's interesting, for my daughters, one is interested in sports psychology and the other one's interested in physical therapy, but and part of it is because they're athletes, but there's a relationship aspect to understanding, what is a Black female athlete you go through and what is expected. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that serves them very well in the professional segment because, what you see is society reward people who are less developed, but you can't raise Black children in this world and not try to overdevelop them because of what they may have to deal with and face with that other segments don't have to. So you end up programming in a lot. I don't want to call it over-engineering, but you stack a lot in the sandbox. But that ends up being a different product at the end of the day. So people need to understand the reason why there are a lot of Black business female entrepreneurs is that bit of grit has been sort of baked in. It's been developed. And I think when I look at the venture capital world and rewarding entrepreneurs or startups and some of the ideas that are head scratchers, it's like there's less of an interest, even for people who have a more developed professional resilience acumen as an entrepreneur, in rewarding what has been easy and what has always been done. It's not that they're short of ideas and creativity, they're short of being considered. And that's really obviously what we're prepping our daughters for, what it's going to take in this America to be considered.
Before I let you go, let our viewers know where they can go to learn more about you and Walton Isaacson.
Sure, absolutely. So obviously, I'm on LinkedIn. It is literally my namesake. And obviously, Walton Isaacson, and it's not Walter, it's Walton. Walton Isaacson, you just Google it, it'll come up. And listen, pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Always welcome to come back. But again, very humbled by the opportunity to speak with you guys.
Well, we'd love to have you back anytime you're ready. We hope you've enjoyed our interview with Albert Thompson, Managing Director of Digital at Walton Isaacson. If you want to know more about the Black consumer market, then check out our annual report, available on our website, www.claritas.com. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for future fireside chats with industry experts like Albert.